Treasury rates are at 20-year highs. The Treasury Secretary is supposedly doing something about it. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing about it, and I'm even going to talk about how Machiavelli told us to handle these situations. This is The Will Whiten Show. First off, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. We are at 89 subscribers. I want to get to 100 as quickly as we can. Please, you can be a part of that. If you subscribe right now, you can be part of getting us to 100. I know it doesn't sound like a lot. There's plenty of people on YouTube that have millions and millions of subscribers. But when I think about it, I think about a room of 89 people. There's currently a room of 89 people that say they are interested in what I am saying. From my view, that is a lot of people, and I'm going to continue to do this at least for that 89 people. And if you allow me, I'm just going to dive into for a second and explain what I'm doing here is different than what we see elsewhere. So there's two components to this. There's the business news component, and then there's the historical and philosophical learning and understanding component, right? So let's take the latter first. So it's very important, obviously, to read history books, to read biographies, to read philosophy. At least I think it's important to try and get a better understanding. It's a great way to learn. It's a way to open your mind and get views from some of the smartest minds that have ever lived in all of history. I think that's very important. There are tons of podcasts and shows that do just that. There's books that dive into that. There's biographies. There's then books that then critique the biographies, and you can go down an infinite rabbit hole to assess that. I think that's all very important, especially if you're in business or you're trying to manage your personal finances. And it's a good thing to constantly refresh your mind with that, as opposed to just reading something once and then thinking you have it and then most likely forgetting about it. And I'll give you an example. The undergrad school I had gone to was a Catholic school. And even though I was a business major, I had to take obviously a few core classes like you do in most colleges, but the school found a way to introduce a small religious component into every single core class, even if it on the surface had nothing to do with religion. For example, a public speaking class, they found a way to work it in. And that happened with every core class I took. In fact, when I went back for my master's degree, I had gone to a large state school and I had taken a business ethics class, and I think it was an administrator or something. They said, hey, how do you as students think that we could step up the ethics program? How do you think that we can make it more pronounced in the business school? And my suggestion was take a page out of the other school that I went to, and I said, put an ethics component in all of your business core classes. If that's what you want to be known for as a school, then you really have to more or less beat the students over the head with it, and then beat the recruiters over the head with it and say, this is what we're doing. Use that as a marketing tool then. So build that into each class and make it 10% of the grade in each of those classes or something like that. That was my suggestion. I don't know if they took that. There's the business news end, which is the other side. And obviously that's everywhere as well. And there's 24/7 news, there's 24/7 business news, there's 24/7 sports news. And I think this is, I've never worked in the news industry. I think there's a dirty secret in the news industry, and that there's probably actually not a lot going on. There's not a lot to really report on, or even if there is a lot to report on, there's not necessarily a lot that will gain a lot of mass attention. And so if you watch CNN or Fox News, there's always alerts popping up. There's always an alert, maybe every 5 or 10 minutes, there's an alert. There's something new to pay attention to get, hey, you have to look at this. This is the next thing happening. And oftentimes a lot of it repeats. I tried watching ESPN, and I watched a few shows in a row, and I quickly found that each of the three shows, they had the same script. They talked about the same thing because there was just the news of the day, and that's all there was. And so even though you had different personalities that had their different shows, they all talked about the same thing. And it just came down to, well, certain people like to hear this person say it, and then other people like to hear this person say it. And we're just going to say the same thing 3 times over 3 hours because there wasn't that much going on. And so I think where I come in is I look at over the course of a week and say, what is the biggest story? Let's talk about that. Let's look at history. Let's look at things that we should have learned if we didn't, and try and apply those lessons today, now, to the most important thing that's happening, not what we think is important every 5 minutes on the news channel, and not just, hey, everyone, here's a good story, here's a good lesson, let's remember that, and then hope, okay, well, I hope I remember that when I need to when I need to know that lesson and apply it. I'm saying let's take the most important thing now and try and apply something to it. And try and apply a historical lesson or a value or a moral to it now. So that's what I'm doing. I think it's different than what's out there. So if you can please subscribe, get us to the 100. But for the rest of the 89 of you, thank you. And I'm picturing just a giant, or a mid-size auditorium right now of the 89 of you. And so we're going to get to the rest of the show now. And this is for you. So the biggest story this week is that the Treasury bonds interest rate has reached 20-year highs. If you look at the 30-year Treasury bond, it's about 5.25%. And just a background on bonds, if the interest rates are going up, the prices are going down. So why are Treasury bond prices going down? There's a general market consensus that says, hey, these bonds, I should get paid more as a bond holder. I should get paid a bit more to hold this bond because there's a lot of stuff happening in America. We hit a $40 trillion debt level for the first time. There's a $2 trillion run rate of a deficit every year. There's obviously the war with Iran that's on and off. There's the possibility of inflation. And so the market consensus is, hey, the U.S. Treasury bonds, they should be paying us a bit more. The interest rate should be a bit higher. And so what are people doing? They're selling some of those bonds, and that drives the price down. So what is the Treasury Secretary's response? Secretary Bessent. He has a typical buying program of about 2 billion treasuries. He said he's going to up the frequency of that and double the size. So he's going to go into buying back $4 billion worth of Treasury bonds. And so the interest rates briefly dipped back down after that news came out. And so perhaps that provided some calm. But then by today, Friday, they went back up. So that it seems like that alone isn't going to quite do it. And we'll take a lesson from Machiavelli, and I'll read from The Prince. This is chapter 15. The code of conduct I'm offering will be rather controversial, but since my aim was to write something useful for anyone interested, I felt it would be appropriate to go to the real truth of the matter, not to repeat other people's fantasies. Many writers have dreamed up republics and kingdoms that bear no resemblance to experience and never existed in reality. So the context I'll give you to this, Machiavelli actually goes on to say, if you want to be a ruler that survives, you can't just keep in your head the idea of, what is a good ruler and try and follow that. There may be instances where you have to do some bad things. This is a good example of how Machiavelli is controversial in this book. But in getting to that, hey, sometimes a ruler must be bad if they want to survive, what he's saying is, and what I read from, is he's saying you have to embrace reality, and you can't just go with the theory and what people are saying and what they hope for things to be. And so if we apply this to the current situation, we can look at the Treasury Secretary's actions, and he was quoted saying that he has other tools in his toolkit, but what we need to do is ground ourselves in reality, and it seems like that's what the market is doing when interest rates went back up. They're saying, okay, Treasury Secretary, we hear you. You're trying to do something. You're actually doing something. You're saying you're going to change how much you're buying back. You're going to buy back more, right? Because if too many people are selling treasuries, you're saying, hey, we're gonna start buying more to try and offset that a bit. But so you're doing something, but we don't think that's enough. And you're saying there's more tools in your toolkit, but we're not seeing you use any of those or really talk more firmly about any of those. And so interest rates continue to go back up, right? There's people trying to focus more on the reality and act in accordance with reality, not the hopes and wishes of other market participants, not the hopes and wishes of the Treasury Secretary or someone else in the administration or some other research analyst. You have to act in accordance with reality. And so that is the takeaway from Machiavelli's The Prince. And so the question is, what can we all do? And I'll tell you what we can do by just what I'm doing. And again, this is not financial advice. And the world that we're dealing in here is bonds. And don't quote me, but I'm fairly certain I don't own any bonds, right? And I try and avoid it. Warren Buffett advises not to have any bonds. Dave Ramsey advises not to have any bonds. A good reason for this that they often use is if you own stocks, or even if you own a mutual fund full of stocks, if you own stocks, then you're owning a part of a business, something that's real, something that produces something, and it can grow, right? If the underlying business grows, if they increase sales, or if they increase prices and make more money, or if they introduce another line of business and make more money, or they acquire some other company and make more money, right? The business can grow, and it can also pay you dividends, right? This is not something you get if you just buy a lump of gold. Gold does not pay you dividends. If you buy a bond and hold it to maturity, you're just going to get a coupon, right? Think of that as the equivalent of a dividend. You're not going to see a bunch of appreciation in the bond. So I follow their lead and do that. Yes, I understand that Warren Buffett has bought bonds and sometimes, but a lot of that is just for his cash that's sitting because he figured he can get a bit better of return. It's not a matter of what he actually wants to be invested in. So as far as what I want to be invested in, I want to be invested in companies, and because I think they can have the chance to grow and pay me a dividend. So that's what I'm doing. And that's why this news in particular doesn't impact me so much, because this is dealing in the bond world. So that's it for today. Please subscribe if you haven't. U.S. Treasury rates at 20-year highs. Machiavelli says, look at what's actually happening. Act in accordance with what has historically worked, and not just what people are saying, and not just what the theory of how you wish things would have worked. Don't act just on the theory of what you wish. Act on what's actually happening. And what I'm actually doing and have typically done is try and center my portfolio in stocks for the reasons that I laid out. Have a good night.